Welcome, everybody, to the 11 a.m. panel titled From Connectivity to Connection, Transforming Digital Equity into Action. We have three excellent panelists and a well-known excellent moderator here today, and I hope you all enjoy the session.
Thank you very much, Martha. My name is Noel Hidalgo. He, him are my pronouns, Executive Director of Beta NYC. I have three amazing panelists. Can you see us out there? Now we can adjust the lights for everybody. Great. We have Councilmember Gutierrez. Woohoo, thank you. We have Paulo Balboa and Joshua Breitbart. So in the session description, it says we will be moving beyond the headlines to examine the architecture of NYC's digital divide. We will explore existing programs and outline new legislative mandates. We will explore how the city is attempting to dismantle the digital redlining that has left neighborhoods offline for decades. Thank you, ChatGPT. No, I'm serious. I actually use ChatGPT a lot in these moderating sessions because, it's a very... No, I felt that it would be an excellent opportunity to figure out how, the robots can help us with language, and it was effective. And I compared that with some Gemini AI results, and ChatGPT won out. So, it saved me time. I know that I probably burned a few forests in the same time. Sorry. So we're going to start off with a question that goes to all speakers. So first of all, we're going to ask each one of the panelists, what brings you hope in this conversation around digital equity? First, I'm going to go to Councilmember Jennifer Gutierrez, author of the New York City Council Intro 1122-2024. Which is the Internet Master Plan law, and former chair of the Technology Committee.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for wanting to be here. Something that brings me hope, so I read this question, what brings you hope? And I was like, my kids. But now in context, in the form of for digital equity, I think something that brings me hope is the activation that I see from my community on the ground. A big reason why I wanted to sponsor the particular bill that Noel referenced, which is Resurrecting the Internet Master Plan, was just everyday people who lived in public housing, people who lived across the street from my office, people who lived down the block who really liked that I cared about broadband. And I don't mean this to diminish anything about them, but these are just regular, hardworking, middle class, low income sometimes folks who depend on their phones, who depend on access, who really want the best for their children, and now their children depend on needing at least access at the very least, even if they don't have the equipment, they want the access to it. So I think the hope for me is that people are really engaged, and because of very many dynamics, people are engaged in many different levels for many different things, but when it comes to equity, when it comes to access, when it comes to universal broadband, that hope for me comes from my community because they're the ones asking for it.
Excellent, thank you. I'm now going to move to Joshua Breitbart, Senior Vice President of New York State's Connect All, and under Bill de Blasio, Mayor Bill de Blasio, the special and then later Senior Advisor for Broadband in the Mayor's Office. What gives you hope?
Thank you, and thank you, Noel, for moderating this, and for everybody at Beta NYC for this event. Last time I was here was February 2020, actually just after the first Internet Master Plan had come out, and just before the internet became something that was undeniably essential for everybody in every community, and those disparities became just so stark and apparent. The thing that gives me hope now, building on what the council member says, is not only have we, have somebody who spent more than 2 decades, trying to get this topic to have airtime and mobilizing resources and advocating for community members, and then being in city government, and then being in state government, is that we now all agree that we have to do something and maintain concerted effort. And it's just really a question of how. The thing that really gives me hope is that in New York, we have this incredible alignment from at the state level, the governor, the legislature, the attorney general, our office at Empire State Development, through regional partners, local government, county governments, and including with this legislation and the team at OTI, the other partners we work with at other city agencies, just the capacity and resources and programs to actually do the work. And I will say that that is not something that every other state has. I work regularly with my counterparts in state offices all across the country, and many of them do not have the full support of their legislature, their governor, do not have engaged local partners across their state, do not have a civic tech ecosystem and set of partners like we see convene at conferences like this because of the work that you've been doing over the past decade. The fact that we have that alignment, those resources, the programs in place, and this mandate from City Council in New York City gives me tremendous hope of what we're going to be able to advance in these coming years here in New York.
Wonderful, thank you. And now to a former advocate, but now internal government advocate. I mean, they're all three of them are advocates, but Paulo Balboa is the Chief Digital Equity Officer for the City of New York, and he was previously the Associate Director of Local Support at the NDIA, National Digital Inclusion Alliance, where he worked with local and regional governments to develop and implement digital equity strategies. What brings you hope?
What brings me hope? That's a good question. I was thinking on this morning as well. I was like, well, it's spring, the trees are budding, like that gives me hope on one hand. Having done this work at the national level for several years before joining the city government last year, like what I was able to see echoing Josh's comment is that other ecosystems, other municipalities, regions, states don't have the body of work that I can just build on, right? Like sorry to sound saccharine early on, but I'm truly, standing on the shoulders of giants here. Like Josh has built up a great framework for us to not only steward, but also iterate on. Like I want to bring what I was doing at the national level and figure out okay, what works in Nevada, for instance? What works in Boston, and what can we apply to New York so that we're not reinventing the wheel? So what gives me hope is the fact that when I'm talking about this stuff, that there's actually people here who are here to listen. Like I remember when we were doing conferences like this in Kansas City 10 years ago, we were in the public library space and it was a room of 30 people. Now to have a conference where there are people showing up, thank you to Noel for featuring digital equity on the main stage, right? And also to hear elected officials echoing the sentiments of digital equity, brought the importance of broadband connection, but also the importance of community and collaboration and partnerships to further that work. I think it gives me a lot of encouragement because it seems like everyone's starting to get it. The question now is, how do we do it, and how do we do it intentionally? And with the council members, the law that the council member authored, we have an excellent opportunity to do this and do it right. And that gives me a lot of hope. It's going to be hard, but we'll get into that a little bit today. So.
Excellent, thank you. So we're going to frame this. By the way, this session on digital equity is something that we've had as an undercurrent throughout School of Data, and over the next few years, we're really hoping to amplify digital equity, AI, digital literacy, as well as just broader conversations around data and service design throughout this conference. So maybe if you have a good idea on how the conference name can change, bring it to us. Ask ChatGPT, maybe. I don't know. So we're going to frame this conversation, starting to frame it from a 2022 piece of legislation that was passed called the Wired Act, which has dedicated over $1 billion to transform digital infrastructure. 2 years later, New York State then released its digital equity plan following a comprehensive statewide engagement process and, ironically enough, federal approval. Josh, what is the approach to the state's digital equity plan, and what data is it using to inform its understanding?
Yeah, so the Digital Equity Plan was part of the mandate from the Digital Equity Act, which was federal legislation passed in 2021, part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and it dedicated funding for broadband infrastructure and broadband adoption programs under the Digital Equity Act. We proceeded to implement the plan, and the way New York approached it was through extensive community engagement, so listening sessions, in every region of the state and in every borough in the city, working with partners and coalitions to do focus groups and collect survey data and build up that engagement infrastructure as part of the data collection process. What has changed significantly since that time is that the federal program was canceled by the current administration, and then the governor recommitted New York to proceeding with implementing the plan using state funding. And now we're really in a moment also, though, where it's really sort of time to renew that engagement and renew the data collection. And I think the work that's happening here in New York City and the way that we can partner with the city can serve as a model for that refresh. But the principle that remains or the principles that remain are, it's a comprehensive look. It's understanding the market factors, the infrastructure, the goals that communities have for how they want to use the internet and the barriers that they face that are specific to each community, and then the principle that it is a partnership that works at the local level, because the state is never going to have the type of local relationships that a council member or a library branch or a local government has. And so continuing to invest in and cultivate that collaboration and that infrastructure, that social and government collaboration infrastructure that works all the way from the local to the state, so that resources and authority that exist at the state level can be tailored to the specific circumstances in each broadband market, in each community, through that partnership.
So our local tax dollars that are ending up at the state are then supporting a broad initiative to ensure that local municipalities have those resources to develop what they need to address digital equity. And each one of their solutions is going to look a little bit different from another municipality based upon the texture and the communities that are there. How is this response different than where we were 20 years ago when you first started this work?
Well, even 10 years ago, we've seen dramatic changes. As I was starting to say, even just in the last 6 years. Some of the things that again have changed is, well, one is I think we're no longer. First of all, everybody understands government has a role. There was once upon a time we debated whether government has a role in this or whether it's something that we leave to the private market. Nobody that I speak to now thinks you just leave it to the private market and it's solved for everybody. And it's really just a question of what is the government role. And again, we've got a range of programs. So one of our programs is using federal funding from the American Rescue Plan Act that was approved in January 2024. By the end of this year, we'll have invested nearly $300 million in public infrastructure programs across the state. No other state has a program like that, and to move $300 million into an effort like that, responsive to the needs of local government, sometimes it's municipal internet service, public-private partnerships, open access networks that multiple internet service providers can share. Within in a 3-year time span to implement that $300 million effort is transformative. And so again, the resources we have are just totally different. The authority from the Wired Act, when we did the first Internet Master Plan, there was no legal authorization or mandate or requirement to do that. So now working with not only resources but authority at the local level and at the state level, as you said, under the Wired Act, is absolutely transformative, and again indicates that this is not an optional set of activities, that this is something government has to do. And again, to commend the council member for really insisting that that is a mandate. It has to be a plan. It has to be coordinated and delivered. And again, I think those are the two biggest changes. Having the resources and having the authority are just totally different.
I love that the Wired Act makes it really clear that municipalities in New York State can build their own networks, right? It just makes it super clear.
I think it's got to be one of the options that's on the table. It's not the right solution for every community. There are some places where we're providing grants so that the private internet service provider can just close that small gap. But there are other places where the community has assessed that they want one network that equitably connects everybody in their community. And I think that's another thing that's changed, actually, is it's no longer just the binary of you have it or you don't. It's really much more nuanced understanding of the quality and nature of your connection. And one of the things that we have to do now is start to really understand and assess the nuances of how many options you have, what types of speed and pricing are available to you, what's the quality and reliability, how are your consumer dollars reinvested in your community. All those things really matter to local communities and to individuals, and trying to understand those different variations, even within New York City or across the state, are essential components now so that we can continue to build on and go beyond the binary sense of, you have it or you don't.
Excellent, thank you. And so the state digital equity plan gives us that framework, it gives us the resources, but it doesn't require cities to produce their own roadmaps. Here in New York City, we still have this amazing council member who was one of the most epic technology chairs. We're hoping that her legacy carries on. And last year, through her leadership, Council passed legislation that reestablished the Internet Master Plan, something that Mayor Adams canceled as one of his first acts, and established a formal requirement. Councilmember, can you tell us about this amazing piece of legislation?
Thank you for thinking it's amazing. And Carmen, who I know y'all just heard from, will be amazing. And I'm still on the committee and actively working with her. And my flowers to the architects of the original master plan. Really, when I was appointed chair, I was very transparent with the tech community in that I did not come from tech. I came from community organizing, but that I think now was the time to really elevate community with the tech experts, that there was no reason that we should be left behind. And so out of all of that research, and thanks to my amazing team at the council and in my staff who said, there's this internet master plan. That's sure, it was published right at the beginning of the pandemic, but it really elevated a lot of the tension that our communities were experiencing as far as internet service options, deserts, where there was no connectivity or very low access. There was very little investment in public access locations like our libraries and schools. And so for me, right away, my background in community really said, well, there's an injustice here, and I feel like I can teach myself this and learn this very quickly. And so the original master plan was really thoughtful, brought in so many experts to really say, not just like, yes, internet is important, but how people get internet in their homes is also important. And let's talk about internet service providers, because it's not just two options, right? It's not just Charter and Spectrum. It's not just the ones that we see advertised. There's a lot of folks doing that work in our own communities that make it more affordable. And that do it better, that may be able to accomplish digital literacy in a way that some of these bigger companies just don't invest in. So it really put together, in my opinion, really strong pillars of equity, a really strong mission, a ton of really good data. And so I was really interested in working with the administration at the time in what I thought were shared goals. Unfortunately, like Noel said, right away, the Internet Master Plan was not going to be a flagship of the Adams administration. For whatever, it's still unclear. He's no longer in office, and I'm still trying to figure out why. But very quickly, it was just, this was a plan that went out before the pandemic, and so much has changed, and so we're just not going to spend a lot of time on that. There are pieces of it that we might want to do. And I just felt like that wasn't a good enough response, because I felt like there were promises made to smaller industrial service providers, first off, many of who were were owned by people of color and women who were really excited to work in communities like mine, like Harlem, like the South Bronx, that just weren't connected before, and they were basically just tossed to the side. And then there was the fact that, yes, we were coming back from the pandemic, and how were we going to permeate equity, digital access without a plan? How are we just gonna like pick any location, piecemeal particular programs, and just pick one or two providers and that's it? That was unacceptable to me. And so the Internet Master Plan took a very long time. It took us all 4 years to pass. We passed it at the end of 2025. But thank you. But it was really important because we need OTI. Right, and this right here, this is a new OTI that I'm pumped to work with. The last administration, it was really tough. They really just refused to see it the way that so many of us saw it. And so the Internet Master Plan, they will be drafting something together by the end of this year, and I'm really hopeful. But it really forces the city to put this plan together, to update it. I wanted it to be updated a lot sooner than every 5 years, but that's at the bare minimum, and to engage with community. You all will have a say on how we move forward. And if you look at any progressive city that's doing right, they've got master plans. Like, let's not be silly about the importance of having a plan and executing that plan to plan for the future. It's a very simple concept, but it makes sense. And so for me, to be able to uplift the really good work of the original master plan and work with the city, with the experts to update it was key so that our city could be connected, so that we could be the best city, so that we could be thoughtful, and so that all of our children really would have a level playing field when it came to this very, very important utility.
Thank you. I feel like I want to give you the heartful clap. I mean, this is the power that we have within Councilmember Jennifer Gutierrez. We have you for how many more years in council? 3, 4. All right. Too short. So this law mandates planning, reporting, accountability, but it doesn't guarantee infrastructure funding or execution. And we have the state framework that helps provide that level of support, but none of that matters if people aren't actually connected in their daily lives. So that brings us to adoption and engagement. And in March 2025, the city launched a digital equity roadmap, which is kind of like this interstitial place between the IMP 1.0. We have the Digital Equity Roadmap, which some of you may have read, and then we have the piece of legislation, which I'm not going to call it out because I promised that OTI wouldn't use an acronym and then a numerical number after that, even though that's the name of the law. But I made promises, and promises are going to be kept on this panel. So we have the Digital Equity Roadmap, and we have this piece of legislation that's paired with new investments in the creation of a chief digital equity officer. So Paolo, as the individual responsible for this roadmap and now helping shepherd the legislation, where are we going?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, thank you for bringing up broadband adoption because I want to start there. A lot of times when we talk about this work nationally, there are, we talk about the differences between like urban areas, rural areas. Here in New York City, when we look at broadband adoption, we're also looking at broadband access, right? Like, what is the proliferation of available providers at a certain address or building? I will say that this data, and speaking to a room full of data folks, I will say that this data is built upon FCC data, which folks in the field have their problems with, but currently, New York City is said to be served at 98% availability. I'm not gonna wipe my hands clean and say like, okay, that's perfect, like we're all done, but I'll bring up the other piece of this scenario, which is broadband adoption, not broadband availability. 98% for availability. When we look at adoption, which is asking households, do you have an internet plan? Do you have a home internet subscription? That number drops to 75%. 3/4 of households in New York don't have a home internet subscription. Our team, and I'm thrilled to be talking at a data conference because I can talk about like the data pieces here. If you look at certain geographies of the city, the Bronx, for instance, over 40% of households don't have a home internet subscription versus in Manhattan, it's in the high teens. So there are inferences that we can make there based on geography. When we think about demographics, talking about older adults over 65, 42% don't have a home internet subscription versus 18 to 64, it's in the mid-20s. So we can look at these social demographics and tie broadband and home internet access to these things and figure out like what are the ways in which we can help solve for this. And I'm glad to hear my fellow panelists and Noelle as the moderator continue to bear down on the importance of community building, community engagement, because we can look at that data and we can make assumptions like, okay, geographies are different, demographics are different, but it's on us to go and actually talk to people and figure out like, if you don't have a home internet subscription, why not? Is it too expensive? Do you not like the providers that are available to you? Would you like to have, or do you like to have a community broadband network, for instance? We're also interested in digging into these other, I'll say like more squishy pieces of the reasons, the barriers to digital equity for folks, which might be that people might be afraid. They might have privacy and security concerns. We know that this, especially among older adults, also with new resident populations, those numbers tend to get higher, but we only know this at the moment anecdotally. So building on my fellow panelists' comments, what we want to do in our approach to writing what we're calling the broadband adoption plan, for branding reasons, we're not calling it the Internet Master Plan because we can't. We can't say, I can't sit here and say that we're going to arrive at the exact same set of recommendations, right? The bones are there of a really excellent plan. Specifically, one of my favorite pieces of the Internet Master Plan is a call specifically for community broadband planning, which that's our path forward. This year, we're going to do resident surveys. We want to hear from folks directly who are lived experts in the digital divide, across those demographics, across those geographies that I mentioned. We want to hear from folks, what are your technology barriers? And we want to make sure that we're framing this in a way that makes sense to people. I can't go into a neighborhood and say, oh, what are your problems with digital equity? Because that's not going to mean anything to anyone, right? Digital equity, like this is the guy who has the words digital equity in my title, and I'll be the first to say that like this is an esoteric term. How do we use plain language to meet folks where they are? And how do we make it make sense to people, right? How do we communicate the utility of the internet, the value that the internet might have, the opportunities that I think everyone in this room knows that the internet provides? How do we communicate the value of the internet and make sure that folks are aware of the existing ecosystem of city agency programs at the libraries, but also programs at community-based organizations that support New Yorkers to get online. Ultimately, it's all about getting people online. And we want to be working with community-based organizations who either work in specific geographies that we know we want to focus on, or who work with specific populations or demographics that we know we want to focus on. For instance, the Fortune Society, working with justice-impacted individuals. See Jacob there, hello Jacob. But also neighborhood-based organizations like El Puente, and making the case to them that you might have a social service that supports getting your residents, getting your people online. So a lot of this will be using like plain language to make the case and say, I think that we have something in common. I think that we can build something together, and we want to take everyone's perspectives into account as we write out what is currently being called the Citywide Broadband Adoption Plan.
Fair. Can you speak specifically about the current surveys that you and your team are trying to get people to fill out?
Sure. Yeah. So those surveys are in process. They're in draft. So the types of outreach and honestly data collection that we want to effort that we want to take on this year is to release surveys through community-based organization partners, through city agency partners whose work interacts with people getting online. And we want to be asking in those surveys, essentially, do you have barriers to technology? And we want to make sure that we're aligning these barriers of technology along like what we in the digital equity world call like the three legs of the stool, the three pillars of digital equity, which are home internet access, device access, and also the digital skills in order to use and navigate the internet. So we want to make sure that we're asking our questions along those lines. We, of course, want to make sure that the survey is short and sweet because we respect people's times. But beyond that, we know that surveying isn't going to give us the complete picture, right? So we want to be doing as many focus groups as we can over the course of this spring and summer in order to hear directly from folks what are those technology barriers? Is there a lack of awareness of existing programs? Is there a certain fear that is based in not wanting to use the internet? Also, we know that along some like religious reasons, some communities might not want to adopt the internet, and that's also fine, right? Like, we're not trying to be prescriptive in what people do with their time, but we want to make sure that residents of New York have all the tools and all the awareness and all the knowledge that they might have that they need in order to be active users and confident users of the internet.
Great, thank you. In about 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to open up the panel to some public questions. So please start thinking about those questions. Make sure you get them down. I guess I got to think about which is the appropriate question to ask here and how to frame it in a way. Let's start off with, what is the data that you started off in the Internet Master Plan 1.0 that you're hoping to see kind of like revived? I'm going to ask that question to Josh. And then Paolo, like, what is the data that, what's the FCC data that you're talking about here, and where is it kind of like not meeting the needs?
So data was a critical part of the Internet Master Plan. There really were, one of the main efforts of putting together the plan, and there were preliminary reports that we did looking at. Oh my God, I don't even remember the names of the reports we put out, but looking at public Wi-Fi and how you do public Wi-Fi, because when I showed up in the city, there was a data set of public Wi-Fi access points, but it treated Wi-Fi in a subway station, Wi-Fi in a library, or Wi-Fi in a park as the same unit of data, which was clearly not actually aligned to. So the first One NYC report that de Blasio administration put out, it said, we're going to have a Wi-Fi access point, I think, within 15 minutes of everybody's home, which is it's a goal related, similar to like park access. Everybody should be no more than a 15-minute walk from green space. But those units of measure were for totally different purposes. And then we realized that we didn't even have. We started talking about access to public computer centers, so that when instead of people using the initial Link NYC kiosks as like public computer centers, to say, no, we have other places that are for going and sitting down and using a computer browser. But then we realized that there was no actual list of all the computer centers in the city. It took us 2 years. It took us 2 years to actually do a comprehensive inventory of all, I believe it was over 500 different computer centers around the city, including how many computer workstations, how old are those workstations, are they wheelchair accessible, those facilities, what are the hours, what additional type of peripheral equipment or assistive technologies are available, is there training, is there language access? So you can't even begin to think about how you plan and deliver digital equity or broadband adoption programs until you have that picture. And then when we went into the planning process, we actually found that the FCC data was quite helpful in some ways. And I don't need to get into the peculiarities of why it's more useful in New York City than elsewhere. But then ultimately, when we put out the plan, we published all of the data on open data, and we worked with a great consulting team at HRNA Advisors. Shout out to Danny and the team there. But we made sure that basically every single analysis that was in the plan was something that either relied on public data or administrative data, so it could be repeated or checked by the public, but it could be repeated without having to hire consultants again. And part of that was just to, and then we aligned also all the data and all the reporting with city planning units of geography, the neighborhood tabulation areas, with the idea being that we wanted to institutionalize the capacity of broadband planning. So even if a new administration wanted to have different recommendations or a different set of priorities, the planning framework could still be utilized as a way to understand and measure and orient the focus of those investments and those activities, adding computer centers, adding capacity at computer centers. The thing that, looking now at FCC data, the FCC data is now available at the location level, and we have worked with local partners and internet service providers to continue to improve the accuracy of that granular data. So now we can also see not just, by census block, is it available, not available. We can actually, evaluate it down at the location level, and we can see that Verizon Fios, while under their franchise terms, may now have, and there was, some litigation involved, passes every single home in the city, but they actually, when they report to the FCC, it's only 77% that actually can subscribe at the household level. So there is a disparity there. If you look at Altice's Optimum, and when the city reviewed when Altice purchased Optimum Cable, they said, oh, we're going to upgrade the whole cable network to fiber optics. And we said, that's fantastic, but we want a commitment that you're going to do that equitably for everybody. And now when you look at it, that's not what the data shows, that in the city, they serve every single household in their franchise territory, but only about 56% are served with fiber versus ones that are served with the legacy plant. And that's part of the challenge that you see in an urban area, is that back when internet service was DSL, everybody had a telephone line, everybody had the same ability to dial up, and it was competitive. But as we've upgraded to newer technologies, and there's been waves of investment, we've layered on disparities, and that's not even, I'm not attributing cause of those numbers. And the work is to understand some of those correlations and some of those causes. But at the state, I'm in the Economic Development Agency, and we have three parts of our mandate. One is closing the digital divide and getting everybody online. Then we also are looking to transform New York's digital infrastructure, which means, do we have an infrastructure that supports not only what we need to do now, but everything that's coming into the future, all the economic activity, all the technology use that we're going to be doing into the future. And then third, facilitate a robust broadband marketplace. And that also does mean, when can private investment flow, and does it flow equitably and efficiently to all parts of the state or within each region? And so looking at for us, looking at those nuances in in 98% availability allows us to understand, well, how many options are those, how is the investment flowing? What are the things that are barriers to that? Is that driven by, perceived income and how that's going to impact the potential return on investment? Or is that being driven by the cost of construction, which was one of the things that we looked at in Internet Master Plan 1.0, and that is a huge factor across the state and within the city, because it costs different amounts of money to build the same mile of fiber in the Bronx than it does in central Brooklyn, even if you're looking at similar household profiles. And so those barriers that impact that ability to continue to upgrade the infrastructure, continue to ensure that companies can thrive and invest, and that we have a robust marketplace that everybody can participate equitably. Those are the data points that we look at.
I'm actually, before we go to questions from the audience, thank you, I'm going to actually go to Councilmember Gutierrez and ask you to talk a little bit more about the public accountability provisions that exist in the legislation, because I think that is a very important aspect, because mayors can change their mind, but they have to be accountable to the law. And now we have your legislation that creates a public accountability board. Can you talk about the advisory board and the things that you want to see come about from this advisory board?
Yeah, thank you. So So it's the advisory board, and so the advisory board is comprised of someone from OTI, the commissioner, or whoever the commissioner appoints, and then the remaining, there's 3 that are appointed by the mayor, 3 by the speaker, and 1 by the public advocate. And it defines essentially like you can't just appoint your homie. Like you appoint someone with some level of digital expertise, someone who can demonstrate that they care about this, or that also someone who can demonstrate like community engagement work, because that is really key to it. And so yes, that they would be working with OTI. OTI ultimately is the agency that publishes this report. And so the accountability piece was really important because we did not have that, unfortunately, with the original master plan. It made all these really great recommendations, started really good conversations with, like I mentioned before, internet service providers. I work on industrial stuff on my night job. And what happened was a lot of these people were kind of left out in the cold, and the conversation around just connectivity in general was severed. And so the language in the Internet Master Plan, which, by the way, for whoever has an extra 10 minutes today wants to read through the legislation, a lot of legislation is text that defines every single thing you're trying to do. So defining equity, defining access, defining high-speed internet, everything, and then also defining that advisory board. But it was crucial that that the city council also played a role. So having the speaker be able to appoint folks, just so that it was known that this was kind of a collaboration, in the same way that the council holds a city hall accountable, the city hall holds the council accountable. But it was really important that we kind of spread those appointments, and the fact that they, have to serve these terms for a minimum of 3 years, that the plan really, there has to be a concerted effort every single year to really share this report publicly on the site, and to update it and to kind of share that back. But all those pieces are really important, because if our shared goal is to be able to connect every single New Yorker who wants to be connected, so I really love that you highlighted that, then we have to be smart, because this whole industry evolves second to second. And we're already so behind, in my opinion, right? We're already so behind. And so being able to open up accountability and transparency measures is how we're going to be able to do so in an honest and I think effective way. So that's why it was really important that we institute the advisory board. And I think that's where we spent a good amount of time with the previous administration, because we learned that the only way that a master plan really works is when there's this happening. We can't just have people in a room kind of typing away, putting something out and saying this is the law of the land. It really has to be a two-way street with everyone. So those pieces are what we felt that were strong at the time, and that the administration agreed with. But I'm really looking forward to kind of the survey results and how you all put it together, and then hearing from everybody. What if in a perfect world you tell me in 2 years, like, we think this is the way we should change the law? We want to do that. We want to reflect the fact that this is always evolving, and so that's why those measures exist the way that they exist. And I'm always open to hearing feedback on how we can make that tighter.
And it's great that we have those levers inside of the legislation. I mean, those are some of the things that we wish that we had inside of the city's open data law when it first got passed, and we eventually get to having to create this broader community of engagement to ensure that there is a public lever, and it's great to have that in the legislation. With the nearly 15 minutes remaining for this particular session, I want to see what type of questions we have from the audience. If you're sitting out there, you can hit speaker. There's a little button. This is UN style. There's a button that you can hit speaker. A red light will turn on the microphone, and you can ask the question. And then from those red lights, I can then call on people because I can see those red lights from here. So we're going to go to the person closest to the aisle over here.
Hey, thank you. So I know there's a lot of effort going to putting a legislation into the law, but there's often times where all the policymakers have those great ideas, but then when it actually comes to implementation, it looks day and night from what they imagined or they intended. So what is a way where you could like almost like amend the policy or like make it better after you see how it runs on the ground, and then learn from those activities and then sort of like is there a room to close this gap between like policy and implementation?
Go first. Yes. So short answer is yes. I mean, as described in the law, like, so I'll start with like the law perspective and then like the practical perspective as well, because I want to address both pieces. So the law, mandates, like as the council member was saying, like the Internet Advisory Board is this accountability measure. Those members of the Internet Advisory Board are, ideally have experience and some sort of advocacy. Like ideally they actually care about this, right? So yeah, they're not just your homies. I mean, we could become friends with them down the line, but so there is an element of accountability there. The other piece of the law, mandates. I'm just saying your words now, but that the law must be updated regularly. So there is a mechanism built into the structure of the law that not only must there be accountability through the Internet Advisory Board, but that it also must be updated regularly. The updating regularly piece is on my office primarily to assess and evaluate the efficacy of the programs and the strategies that we're saying the city should do, but also with regular communication with the Internet Advisory Board, who represent the different structure, the different branches of government. Like we get to hear directly from folks like so it's not only us sitting in a black hole, right? Like we're talking with folks who represent different interests and different backgrounds so that we have a variety of perspectives in the room. So as I won't speak to the amending piece because that's a little bit out of my purview, but I'll just speak into the implementation piece there.
I'll just also add, part of like our job at City Hall is we're having these hearings and we have these topics and we have these discussions. So before we did anything with the bill, we had a whole hearing on what is it was literally called Resurrecting the Internet Master Plan, but it was with the intention to hear from New Yorkers. And so that is kind of how we proceed. And some of you heard from Technology Chair, Councilmember De La Rosa. She's really excited about this. There's a lot of benefit for her community. And so, every year at the minimum, we'll have a hearing at City Hall. You can all come to in person or testify virtually, where we will hear from the city and we will hear from advocates. And there's always an opportunity to amend. Sometimes it's hard to get done, but to say that every single bill is absolutely perfect and that's it, we're turning the page is absolutely false. So there is always an opportunity to be realistic. It doesn't happen right away, but that is part of the accountability between the public and the council, that we have these hearings and that we have you all testify. So there is opportunity, yes.
I also I want to make sure I shout out my colleagues who are here. Tisha Pryor is the Director of Digital Equity at the Connect All office. Nazir Jeffries, Senior Program Manager with the office. Erin Murphy is the Data Lead, focuses on digital equity on our office. Also our former colleague, Megan McDermott, also former city, so somebody who's bridged those worlds. And I say that partly to say, like, the critical thing in addition to the opportunities that are in the law is you have to build the civic engagement. You have to build that level of community engagement and community power, both, for the conversations that constituents have with their elected officials, as the council member was referring to, but also the organizations like Beta NYC, like the small businesses that advocated, to move the law forward. You have to, keep that going because, well-written legislation and laid plans will provide those points of engagement and those opportunities, but there has to be the civic infrastructure that engages in that. And I say that as somebody who, before this existed in as even a role in city government, was helping to organize 40 organization coalitions to submit a petition around the problems with the original Verizon, franchise legislation. So, that is sustained work. You have to build those coalitions. You have to make sure that of all the critical things that government has to attend to, that there's a limited number of hearings that City Council can have. They respond to the needs of constituents, and we will also respond, as a Connect All office, be responsive to meetings, to coming here to public events. So engage with the people in our office, and seek information and share your expertise, and not just your individual expertise, but build coalitions and speak with organizations on this issue.
Government responds to power, and government responds to pressure. And effectively, we now see that there are levers inside of the legislation to apply that pressure and to exercise our power, but it is up to us as a community to ensure that happens, and to do so in a diverse ecosystem to make sure all of those needs are met. So I saw there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wow. Okay. So
York speak.
you turn the red light on. There we go.
Hi, good morning.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
no. Go to the next. Go to the next one.
Technical difficulties.
Oh no. Oh no.
Come here and use our mics.
Or yell it and I can reiterate it.
Good morning, Ashley Figueroa. My question is, once you do have this information and you do collect all this data, what is your plans to translate this to communities like the Bronx who don't have very much tech skills, so they can understand things beyond the spreadsheets and reports and large data sets that are within open data, something that can be one-on-one and anybody can understand in plain text, as was discussed?
Yeah, no, I love that question. Along with going back to the data collection piece, not only do we want to hear from residents through surveys, focus groups, we also, and this is taking a page out of the state's digital equity plan as well, we want to hear from the diversity of stakeholders. I'll use that term, but who's doing what, when, where, and how. We're collecting information now through something that we're calling a digital equity resource survey. In Josh's spirit, I'm going to call out Rachel Granger, who's sitting in the front row, who has designed and put out that survey. But through that survey, we're trying to figure out, again, using plain language, so we're not calling it asset mapping, even though that's how it lives in my head. We're trying to figure out who does what, when, where, and how. What types of geographies, what types of demographics who do you work with? And in our approach to the plan this year, along with resident surveys, along with focus groups, we want to be talking with all of the people who fill out our survey, essentially, and have a conversation with them and figure out what's working, what are your existing programs, how can partnerships bolster or supplement existing programs. I came from the library world before my first job was in the libraries, and even libraries, which are usually pointed to as community organizations, the bastions of communities, we also lived in a silo, and we also didn't know who was doing what, when, where, and how. So from our position in the city, we're really looking at ourselves as a convener. We have this bird's eye view of the ecosystem, as I'll call it. So the way that we can connect organizations is something that we're looking into. We're also looking into, what are the pain points, what barriers exist, and we want to make sure that we uplift not only the promising practices, but also strategies to address those barriers inside of the plan, so that those organizations will be better equipped to serve the eventual resident. That's who we eventually want these programs and these policies to reach.
I'll say that is a fair and fantastic question to ask of government. It also is not government's strong suit. There are a lot of experts who do that in New York City for sure, but that's one of the critical roles of open data and organizations like Beta NYC is to do some of that translation. There's an organization in the city called the Center for Urban Pedagogy. Before I was in government, I was at a nonprofit organization. We partnered with Center for Urban Pedagogy on an educational video, which you can still watch online. Internet is serious business. And the goal there was, because we were working with social justice organizations, immigrant rights organizations, youth, media makers, and we wanted a video that we could use to translate these engineering technical issues of the internet to the experience, and language of a high school community that then could be used as part of that organizing and education process. Some of it is outdated, like probably the tie that I'm wearing in the video is probably pretty outdated.
Now I'm gonna look at it.
But a lot of it holds true. But I think that that's really part of the importance of the civic tech community, and to put that effort and those skills to this issue will be so powerful as the data from this process comes forward.
Thank you. We're going to do some popcorn questions here. So gray sweater first, you're going to ask, and then I'm going to call on the next person, and then the next person. So gray sweater. Go.
Oh, yeah. So I'm Francis. I work with human service organizations to figure out how they can reduce the administrative burden of their program staff for gathering data. And I think we're all here because we believe in more data is better. And I think broadly speaking, on the one hand, we need to reduce administrative burden for program staff. On the other hand, no, I think it's working. Oh, is it working? Oh, wow, look at that. So on the one hand, we need to reduce their administrative burden, but I think on the other hand, it seems to me like it's probably really costly for you all to figure out how to actually get data from human service organizations. That is, Paolo, you were talking about actually getting these surveys. I would just love to hear what actually operationally, in particular for all the folks in the room who are doing this coordination, what does it take from a draft of a survey to maybe a Department for the Aging, contractor to actually deliver that survey to their clients? Like, what's that in between look like today?
Next question. I'm gonna ask these questions. We got 5 minutes left, so.
I just wanted to start by saying thank you, not just for speaking today, but also for the incredible work you guys are doing in terms of digital equity. I was really interested in your guys' background from national work to kind of more local work. I was particularly interested in Paolo's kind of shout out to Nevada because my home city is Las Vegas, and I would love for Las Vegas to be having discussions like this, although I think they're a little farther away from that. And so understanding that New York truly is like an international city, a city of the world, that kind of comes with an obligation knowing that New York is and has always been a trendsetter. So returning to the original framing of today's panel of hope, do you guys have any hopes about how your approach may inspire or inform other cities following suit?
All right, and then the last question, pink shirt in the back.
Hi. Hi, my name is Jacob. I work with the Fortune Society. Thank you for the shout out earlier, Paolo. In the conversation that you guys have had today, there's been a lot of talk about broadband connectivity, internet connectivity, internet access. But I think throughout the conversation, I think I heard digital skill training access mentioned twice and digital device access mentioned 0 times. And I'm curious how we can shift the conversation from internet access, which, as Paolo described, the ability to connect to the internet, there's like 97% coverage, but the engagement is 75%. How can we do a better job of shifting the conversation more toward those accessibility issues of who cares if I have internet access if I don't have a device to connect to it, or who cares if I have a device if I don't know how to use it? So that's my question.
So to summarize, how do we get digital literacy written into this conversation? Because actually that was a huge gap of the original digital equity roadmap that the city produced and some of the testimony that got baked into the legislation. How do we translate all of the questions of the surveys? And then ultimately, how do we really demonstrate leadership and not become just use New York exceptionalism as an excuse to not be a leader? You can choose them as you want, and these are your final statements.
Okay, I'm
'cause
going to
we're
go
out
as
of time.
quickly as possible. Gray sweater, I'm so sorry. Francis, now I remember your name. I think for how do we do the surveys? We have to lean on organizations, and we're living under a Mamdani administration who single-handedly really leveled up social media. That I think is going to be key. We want for people to understand that this is happening. There are surveys happening. I won't tell Paulo how to do his job, but I think like that is a key piece. It's every level of engagement is really important. Almost every senior center has some level of like digital literacy programming. It's not perfect, but those are really good opportunities to talk to people who don't necessarily have devices at home, have connectivity at home, or even want it at home. But there are opportunities, and it's going to be part of our job at council to work with OTI and to work with these awesome groups like Beta NYC to make sure that we are ensuring that people know this is happening and that we want to hear from them. The second one was about New York City exceptionalism. That's a really good question. I mean, I think there are municipalities that are doing really great work. We're really lucky, like Josh said in the beginning, that the state is doing really awesome work and is really forward thinking, and that under this administration, I think we are aligned with them. But there's already nationally a bunch of networks. I was a part of a network through Local Progress that's really talking about AI and guardrails to AI. So a lot of that stuff is happening. We just have to really, do a better job as New York City as promoting as like, not only are we trying to be leaders, but we're also really good partners, and we're doing that. And then there was the last question. Digital literacy. The skills. I felt like we talked about it. I feel like we said digital literacy or skills building. It was a question. I already forgot how we're going to do it. I'll pass it off to someone else. I'm so sorry. I forgot already. What was the question? What was the question on digital literacy?
I think what I'll say is the key there is also, I'd be remiss certainly if I didn't also point out another thing that has changed, which is that we have a law in the state of New York called the Affordable Broadband Act, which requires that internet service providers make a $15 option, or in some cases it's a $20 option available. We do have partnerships with SUNY to add digital literacy components into the work that they do with incarcerated populations in the state. And one of the things that I hope will come out of this plan, expect will come out of this plan, is that the diffuse set of activities related to education and device access that happen across those 500 computer centers, Department of Youth and Community Development, which we've provided a grant to help coordinate and assess what they're doing, will all be brought in, the Big Apple Connects investments they're making at NYCHA, all those things will be brought into one coherent space. The thing for New York, I will say is, we do not at the state level, and in my experience at the city level, if we're comparing ourselves to other cities in other states, we're doing it wrong. Like, we have a responsibility as New York City and as New York to be leading the national conversation. So don't accept the standards that are the national standards. Set the standards that will become the national standards. And the whole team at Connect All wakes up every single morning not thinking, are we doing okay compared to other states? But I mean, to be cheesy about it, but Excelsior, like upward. Like, what can we do more for this state? How can we do what we're doing now but better? And that's what drives us. It's not like, are we meeting national standards? And I think the same goes for the city.
We're at time, but you got fine. Yeah, okay. All right, so.
That was great.
Yeah.
That was so
Okay.
good. I
Okay.
have nothing else to say. Yeah.
All right. With that, I will translate Excelsior into Spanish. Palante. We are going to move this conversation forward every single year. We do digital equity work. We've gotten funding from the Connect All team. We thank you for that. We are going to be supporting the digital equity team's survey outreach. We'll be having it in our weekly newsletter, so please subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You will see that. You will be seeing these calls to action. We will be supporting all of these activities as much as we can. So please tell us how to support digital equity work. We want to be sharing the great classes and opportunities that Fortune Society does, that Palante does, El Puente, Palante. I just want to say thank you again to all the panelists for being here, their colleagues and staff who are here.
And our ASL translators, thank you for the work that you did, and thanks to the moderator.
Yes. Well, thank you to the interpreters. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.